Okay, we're going to have a big segment here, a big concept anyway. I want to talk to you about rational thinking and behavior, but more exactly to do with, good. How do we judge things that are right and wrong, the most intelligent actions that we can be capable of, okay? All right, I'm going to start with Abraham Maslow, famous psychologist and writer. I expect most of you would know his work, and particularly his very famous hierarchy of needs. That's what he was particularly well known for. Okay, now it's a scale, a rising scale. So you need to start at the bottom there with the word physiological. And the lowest, most basic need is physiological things like food and water, air. the most elementary things without which there isn't any life anyway. When the basics are taken care of, then the next thing that comes into view is sort of safety issues, like shelter, protection and so on. So, and it's interesting because, the basic survival needs do not take account of safety. If an organism is hungry, it will risk anything to get food. A human being will risk anything, even death, to get food and water. You have to. You've got no choice. When the safety issue and all the basic biological needs are taken care of, then the next thing that drives us seems to be a sense of love, affection and belonging, like family and tribe, group things. We desperately want to belong and not be lonely. We're essentially gregarious creatures, humankind. Once that's taken care of, when we're in a group, people are with us, then we want to be liked. We want to be part of the group. We want them to like us and esteem us. And of course, part of that is self-esteem. As you know, it's very fundamental. If you don't like yourself, then you feel that other people are not liking you. It may not even be true, but that's how it feels. So self-esteem is pretty important too. And then we come to the highest rung on Maslow's ladder, which is self-actualization. This is a very powerful, highly motivated individual that's living very rationally. I don't agree with everything that Maslow says. Karen Horney was one of his choices for a self-actualized individual. She's a Freudian psychologist. I don't particularly want to be like Karen Horney. My highest aspirations for self-actualization are along more spiritual lines, really. Here you can see it represented as a pyramid or a triangle. It's not to say that at the top, where it's narrowed and pointy, it's not so important. But I think if you flip it the other way, you'll see that the physiological things, the food and water, the basics, are absolutely the foundation on which everything else is built. And then once you've got those basics, then, as I said, safety becomes an issue, health, protection, even just a roof, things like that. And then joining with family and friends and intimacy, and this whole issue of esteem leading up to self-actualization. I mean, it's a great concept, and it can be defined. I mean, it's the person who's moral, who's creative, highly energetic, someone specially or amazingly, clever, like you think of Einstein or Beethoven. They all have their little quirks, incidentally, self-actualized individuals. I mean, they're all, you can find negatives in all of their lives, but generally speaking, they're highly powerful and creative people that we'd like to be around, and have done great things, push mankind forward without question. And that's why I'd perhaps have chosen Freud rather than Karen Horney herself. Now, the thing that's limiting about Maslow's model, and it's only a limitation, I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's simply what people do, what imperatives drive them, motivation. It's one of the things that's, this hierarchy of needs, one of the things that's taught in motivational and, business seminars. That's as far as it goes. It justifies hard work and trying to get rich. But it doesn't tell you enough, really, to be able to define things like intelligence or right or wrong. It's just saying what is, basically, rather than what could be good or what would be better, even than just covering the basics. So, for a long time, many years, I've been on the search for better things, better models, and I'd like to share with you what I've got so far, okay? I'm going to move on, I'm going to move backwards in time now with a man called Jeremy Bentham. And he lived in the late Enlightenment period into the early almost the Victorian period. An absolutely amazing human being. He was a prodigious writer. He left a legacy of over 5 million words. That's a lot of writing when you bear in mind the average novel is like 70, 80,000 words. And this was in a time when to write at all, often it was only with a quill pen and ink, and often meant after dark, you know, doing it by candlelight. So it was a, you know, pretty formidable output by any standards. Jeremy Bentham, he invented a system, or described a system, in which he called utilitarianism. You know, what's good, what's useful, in other words. Well, he used this phrase, the greatest happiness principle, that a thing was good to the degree it brought the most people the most happiness. That's the sort of cornerstone of his thinking. Not a bad idea. And he came up with the idea of a procedure for kind of figuring out how much good and how much happiness a thing did. He called it the felicific calculus. That's from the word felicity, which is an old word meaning happiness. It's from the Latin felix, meaning happy. But our English word felicity means happiness. So the felicific calculus is just a way of figuring out how much happiness. It's nice. It's a lovely turn of phrase. And, you know, you kind of figured out how much, it's a hedonistic thing, you know, how much people liked it, not necessarily how good it was, or it's partly including moral status, but remember he's saying the greatest good is the most happiness. That's the greatest good in principle anyway. To work out this calculus, don't worry, I'm not going into the calculus, it's not important to us here. But he had this system where he listed 12 pains that humans suffer from and 14 pleasures. And so you could count, you know, how many in column A and how many in column B, and you could come up with this happiness factor. Today, of course, we'd use the word index, so you'd call it a happiness index. What's the happiness index of any sort of proposed course of action? Still, you know, it's a good idea. And Bentham had this very famous pupil who carried on with this greatest happiness principle and teaching it and writing about it, again, a Victorian English gentleman. And his name was John Stuart Mill. And his name is probably even more than Jeremy Bentham's associated with the phrase, the greatest happiness principle. This is the foundation of utilitarianism, right? The most happiness among sentient beings, I suppose they're saying you can discount wasps and worms and things. They're not feeling and not thinking, so who cares? Buddhists, of course, don't share with that view. But it's nicely phrased that this is within reason. You know, within reason, a thing is good so long as it brings a lot of pleasure. But of course, there are things that are not within reason. John Stuart Mill, in fact, fine-tuned this sort of happiness idea, and he introduced the concept of the quality of happiness. So not all happiness is equal. Some happiness is better than others. And this was all encapsulated really in a famous phrase that he wrote, which is, it's better to be a human and not very happy than to be a pig and deliriously happy. I think you see what he's saying, and there's some point to it, certainly. The problem is, the fact is, that the principle of the greatest good for the greatest number does have certain weaknesses. You know, we would feel uneasy with some of the applications. We would naturally feel that it wouldn't be right to do things that basically we think are bad just because it made people happy. You know, that's not a good enough reason. I mean, Hitler, for example, would argue that the slaughter of the Jews, that was the greatest good for the greatest number idea. You know, we'll get rid of these people, if they're people, called Jews, and that'll make the human race a lot nicer, a lot cleaner, a lot happier place. I mean, it was a ghastly calculation with horrific consequences, and about as stupid as it can be for a man who you would think was actually fairly intelligent. If you go back to Roman times, you know, the games in the arena, the Colosseum, it was all about making people happy. They all gathered round to see gladiators, and threw Christians in there and watched, you know, all applauded and had great fun and laughed like anything when the Christians got killed and gobbled up by wild animals. Made a lot of people happy. But it was cruel and barbarous. So the greatest happiness principle is not actually wrong in itself and not actually flawed in itself, but it relies entirely on intelligent, wise judgments by wise human beings. And that's why I come back always, you can't get away from it, to my concept of rationality belonging in behavior, especially good behavior. As I said, weakness is with that. So I started to look for a better model. Could we do something else that would take us beyond this? And I want to share with you what I found. I was looking for the idea of something that would enhance, us as human beings, that in portraying and enacting this idea of good behavior, rational behavior, that it was about your stature, how great a person you were, how much magnificence and, greatness of being, how forgiving and how wise you could be to come up with what were good answers, wise answers, and compassionate answers. I call it the kind of Merlin Effect, or these days, in modern times, you'd have to call it the Gandalf Effect. These wise figures dressed in robes. They were supposed to be with magical powers, but more than anything, what you're aware of is that they're smarter than the rest of us. They can see much deeper into things and the consequences. Because here's the problem. Here's the problem with all this right and wrong, good and evil, ethical behavior thing, which is it takes an awful lot of rationality. It takes big mind power to fully work out the consequences of any act. Let's say, wife's in a marriage, couple of kids, and she wants to leave the husband. She might only be aware of the short-range things, which that she'd be happy at, and feels that the kids must come with her because she's the mother, she'd look after the kids. She may be not even arguing that the kids would be badly off with dad, but that's what she wants to do. But is seeing it very short range, and she can't foresee how these children will grow up. They may grow up, hating her because they didn't want her to do that. They may love their father and go back to father. The kid may become overwhelmingly depressed and end up in antisocial or criminal, or end up drugged to death for depression and things like that, or actually commit suicide. I mean, how can you see that far ahead? You can't. So it becomes a very difficult issue. So, looking in other directions, I thought of perhaps the greatest love principle. That would take care of the divorce bit, because, she'd have to bring in so much love if she really insisted on parting, that it was done with such love and tenderness and kindness and integrity and intelligence that nobody fell out, nobody got upset with anybody, equal rights with the kids, mother and father treating each other with civilized values. I mean, how much that doesn't happen today, does it? It just simply doesn't. But, you could cover those problems as well, really. And again, it's about, to be able to love and be grand and magnificent to everybody, to be generous and loving, is to be great. And I want you to understand that. I want you to have greatness through love, right? To be able to love all things, everything, equally, give all the equal amount of love and measure. Now, I don't mean an equal amount of tolerance, or say, everyone's worth the same as everyone. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying that entitled to equal amounts of love. And if you can do that, then it's a truly great gift that you have from higher power. Let me remind you of something else. I don't know if you remember this, but back in the 1970s, there was this movement, random acts of kindness and mindless beauty. This came, it's a catchphrase, a kind of witty twist on the fact in those days there was, random acts of killing and sort of mindless violence. It's something that came up on our radar so much in the 70s. And Ann Herbert, who generated this movement, that's the right word, generated it, came up with this phrase, random acts of kindness and mindless beauty. And it was lovely. You would see people, it began to catch on as a social phenomenon. You'd see people walk to the front of the line in the coffee shop and say, I'll take all these people's coffees and pay for everyone's coffees and say, yeah, have a nice day. And somebody else would do it tomorrow. Or in traffic, people wouldn't be trying to fight each other to get away from the lights first and cutting people up in traffic. It would be, no, after you, don't worry. And people, didn't feel that they were being inferior or stamped on just because they let other drivers get away first in traffic. It's still around. My first wife subscribed to it a lot. I wouldn't mind a little bit of random kindness from her in this direction, as a matter of fact. I'm very patient. I'll wait. But she still loves it, and it was a delight to see her embrace this movement back in those years. And as I say, there are still people still around that remember it and still spend some time on it. The trouble is, we can't live by it. It's a bit difficult because we can't always be spontaneous and doing. We have jobs to do, we have schedules to keep. We have to live deliberately too, not just fully spontaneous. So we need something better. Now, it seems to me that we do need some kind of a thinking framework, into which to make our calculations or our estimates of the rationality, the sanity, the value of something. A bit like Bentham's felicific calculus. Maybe we could do something else, something that will give us a clearer view of what we're seeing, how to lay out the elements and make the best judgment over the broadest possible area, what's in focus, what we have in the foreground, what moves to the background. And I have something for that. It's my 12 channels of being, okay? And it's my view that rationality is serving the widest possible good in the broadest number of channels. So I've introduced the phrase, my greatest universal good principle. There's weaknesses with that, as I'll explain, and I do admit, but it's handy. For those of you not sure of the 12 channels, you haven't read it yet, I do advise you to go and look at that particular video, or read it if you've got a book with a piece about it in. I'll remind you of the first 8 anyway. The first one is the inner self, mind and spirit, the inward life. The second channel is the outward life. Your surroundings. It would include things like your playlist and your car, your clothes, how you dress, and so on. It's a bit like dividing it into our spiritual being and our creature being. You've probably heard me say this in some of my other talks. But one of our fundamental dichotomies as humans, we have this life as spirit, but we also have the life as an animal. And the two don't quite harmonize. The animal has got its biological drives, and these are often very overpowering, like the sexual drive, and we want to reproduce. But if you're trying to live a spiritual life and be a monk, the sexual drive can be a real pain in the butt. So, as I say, they could be somewhat in conflict. So that's 1 and 2, okay? The third channel, spouse or significant other, meaning the sort of romantic sexual love interest, that the partner idea. Channel 4 is children. Well, not just children, but the protoplasm line, shall we say. So the children going down forward, but going backwards through your life, that's your ancestors, the people whose protoplasm led to you. And of course, it's right to honor your ancestors, and they are a part of you. They're on board with you. We find this from Supernoetics piloting. It's very clear that a person's ancestors are on the table with the person right now in how they think and behave. Channel 5 be the work group and prosperity. How you're doing in life, how you're impacting, how you're making your mark. Channel 6, tribes and tribings, different groups we belong to. You could probably stretch that as far as a nation. Typically a tribe we think of as like 100 to 200 people, or small numbers anyway, where people can get to know each other. A nation is a bit bigger than that, of course. But you'd have to go to channel 7 to cover all of mankind, all humankind. And then channel 8 is all living things, the biosphere. And of course in reverse, the biosphere is very diverse, includes mankind. Mankind is very diverse and includes all the tribes and groups that you belong to, and so on, right back down to you, channels 1 and 2. And I'm not even bothered about the next 4 channels, right, 10, 11 and 12. The first 8 would make life complicated enough as it is. But you see, it's a kind of framework in which you can make some determinations about the value or impact of what you're doing and what you're thinking. And the concept of creating real harmony and accord, right, along all these lines, really, if you think about it, doing right and doing well in the maximum number of areas through the maximum amount of life, down through the maximum amount of time, I might say, because, doing good this week that screws up and ruins everything in 10 years' time, that's not smart, tell the politicians that. Getting it right all down the line. In other words, it's not just a definition of ethics and ethical, proper, good, wise behavior. That's ethical behavior. It's also a definition of sanity, as I keep saying. It's a definition of intelligence. The more you can calculate in mind the impact of what you're going to do down the line, the more intelligent a person you are. the more creative future that is good for you, that you can create, then the more intelligent a person you are. I've said this many times and many different ways in my writings. The reverse of that is that harming broadly against these channels is just an act of self-damage. Therefore it's stupid, you know, it's the opposite of wisdom and intelligence. I mean, I've used the example of Hitler, but you know, he was driving forward with his tribe, you know, the German nation, and we're going to grab what we want, we're the master race. And, you know, forgot the fact that humankind, Channel 7 and Channel 8, were also part of his territory. And he discounted that, stupidly discounted that. So when he starts killing and slaughtering other parts of mankind, eventually they fought back and wiped him out. It's only obvious. So it was a very... You know, Hitler is sometimes thought of as quite a clever guy because he wrote to such prominence, but actually he's immeasurably stupid if you see it in these terms, that he couldn't see the real consequences of ignoring the whole spectrum of channels and not just grabbing on the one or two things that you really sort of felt you cared about. Now, judging right and wrong and things like that, fairness, justice, isn't really just counting numbers. This is where I'm going. There is also another element, what I call the self-reflexive element. Anyone wise and understanding in, you know, modern psychology would understand that our actions actually react directly onto our own self and being. What we do defines what we feel and how we are in a big way. You cannot do any kind of act without it having some effect on you. Certainly you can't do a bad thing that you know is bad without really gutting yourself and feeling poor. So, you know, it's not intelligent, therefore, not rational to do that. We actually feel by doing, you know, that's what we do creates the sensations and experience that we get of life. And it's very naive and stupid to realize, or to think, I should say, that you can do bad things to other people or anything, you know, animals, pictures, just do bad, destructive things and it not hurt you. You are bone deep stupid if you think that that could be true. It simply isn't. So, looking for a phrase, you know, that best encapsulates this, you know, really benevolent, magnificent you know, to get the principle of universal goodness and how you'd be, you know, wise, you'd be kindness and tolerance, intelligence, justice and harmony, all the sort of big things, bringing all these into how you live and how you think and how you speak. Let's not forget that how you speak tells us greatly about how you are. You know, actions speak loudly in words, right? What a person is and what a person is being comes out of what they're thinking, what they're saying, and what they're doing. That's what I'm trying to say, okay? I was looking for something or some principle that puts us in the decision seat for our own actions, you know, responsibilities and values that we have. That which best defines the highest level of life and spirituality and good, and something that demands of us in return, you know, we want this grandeur, this magnificence of being, but we have to give back, you know, mercy, stature, wisdom, all of these things. Mercy is a very important concept. You remember the famous speech by Portia from the Merchant of Venice, mercy is twice blessed, it blesses the giver and the receiver. Okay, this is the important point. Obviously, if somebody's granted mercy, they feel good, they think, whew, I'm not going to have my head cut off after all. But it also does good things for the giver. The person who is merciful benefits reflexly in the way that the person who receives the mercy does too. So big, I'm looking for big stuff. And to me it comes down to this phrase, the highest spiritual accord. If we can live lives of the highest spiritual accord, we want it from spirit to inform our lives. The highest, the best calculation we can come up with, that's what it means. It's not your philosophic calculus, but it's saying the best performance that you can figure out. And the word accord, you know, harmony, getting on, togetherness, value, and so on. In Supernoetics, this phrase, we use it as synonymous with the best ethical decisions and judgments and behaviors, the most rational living, the highest good that includes everything, not just something or our favorites, but the highest we can come up with that embraces all of those things. Interestingly, by the word accord is from Latin and it means to the heart, ad, and which is to, and core. So to the heart, I think that's a rather lovely touch actually. The highest spiritual accord, okay? Please try and live it, live by it, and be it if you can. It's going to speak to the very best of everything that you are and everything you can be. Thank you.